His name is all over the first pages of Shakespeare's first folio, but our schoolmasters don't like what Ben Jonson has to say about Shakespeare. They say he's mean-spirited and other bad things, just like the engraver. Really? How bad? Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Fred Faulkes. I'm a retired librarian who's had an interest in Shakespeare's biography these past 25 years. I've learned a few things along the way, and these are the things that I want to share with you. Now, it is this year, it's 2023, but it's the 400th anniversary of the first publication of Shakespeare's first folio, which first appeared in 1623. And so, to mark the anniversary, I'm spending the first several episodes of this program on the first folio. In the second episode, we looked at the name. The third episode, we looked at the image. The fourth episode, we looked at the printers and the patrons. And today I want to look at a gentleman whose name appears prominently in the first pages of the first folio, indicating that he had some kind of major role to play therein. But our school teachers don't really like what Ben Jonson has to say about Shakespeare. And so let's have a look at those things. Jonson's verse to the reader is the first thing we see. Here he attempts to immediately deflate the negative impact of the strange engraving. As we noted in episode 3, the illustration allegorically reveals that the man pictured was the face of the enterprise, but not its body. And indeed, in his warning verse, Jonson tells us that the engraver tried to outdo the life, whatever outdo means. Yet, he commends the engraver for hitting the face. Yes, well, we've already considered how well the face was hit, and he's certainly correct in that. As to what outdoing the life might mean, I can't really say. But he recommends that the reader not look at the image too long and rather spend the time reading the book, which is fair advice. Although the letter of dedication to the Earl of Pembroke and his brother, as well as the letter to the reader that follows, are both signed by two of the actors from Shakespeare's company, a note found in Jonson's later papers indicates that he, Jonson, actually wrote both letters on behalf of the actors. Although the letters superficially function as such letters should, the language in them is strangely muted and non-committal, and anyone looking for the biography of the poet is going to be sorely disappointed. All we hear about the man from Stratford, for example, is in one letter we hear that he was so worthy a friend and fellow, which sounds nice. And in the other letter we learn that the actors never found a blot in his papers. Whatever that might mean, kind of gives me the impression that Mr. Shakespeare arrived at the Playhouse with clean copy in hand. Anyway, the letter to the reader is all about buying and reading the book without criticizing it too much. And it unusually does not even mention the name Shakespeare at all. But it's in Ben Jonson's dedication to Shakespeare called To the Memory of My Beloved that we get the greatest jolt satirically. Jonson spends the first 14 lines, the length of a sonnet, to set up a little joke. he explains at length how he cannot praise Shakespeare because no matter how hard he tries, he cannot do the poet justice. It would be, and I quote now, as some infamous bawd or whore should praise a matron, what could hurt her more? What? Jonson, the whore? Okay, I can understand that, but Shakespeare, the matron? What's that all about? Perhaps it's time I tell you how Ben Jonson actually got involved with the Pembroke faction, as it were. I told you in a previous episode that when the Earl of Pembroke's Men was established, it wasn't the boys' father who took the interest in the players, it was their mother. And this, of course, was immediately noticed and mightily disapproved of. The bishops appear to have been the main culprits here, and they got their attack dog in the press, Thomas Nash, to start producing pamphlets written against her, her family, her dead antecedents. It just went on and on. Eventually the palace became involved and settled the matter, and for 2.5 years there was peace. But then in 1596, for some unknown reason, Thomas Nash went off the deep end again and wrote a horrible pamphlet in which he called her a whore a half-dozen different ways before declaring open sexual season on her. Now, the Pembroke family would have loved to have thrown this little twerp into jail, but they couldn't because he stood under too much protection. He was beyond arrest. He couldn't even be assassinated, without there being major fallout, thanks to the protection that the church offered. So what could they do? Well, they decided on a kind of underhanded method of trapping Thomas Nash into committing an act of sedition. And this is where Ben Jonson came in. Ben Jonson had been working at the opposition theatre, the opponents' theatre on the south side of the Thames, the Rose Playhouse. He'd been trying to make a name for himself as an actor and as a playwright, but without success. And after his big falling out with the Countess, I suspect that Thomas Nash was probably once again at the Rose, writing plays there so as to keep working. And the Pembroke faction got Jonson to hire Nash to write the first act of a play. And then Jonson wrote the other 4 acts, but in such a way that it made the work an act of sedition, plain and simple. So on a day in July 1597 at the Swan Playhouse, Ben Jonson and the new Earl of Pembroke's Men debuted The Isle of Dogs, as written by Thomas Nash. Well, they barely got through the performance before all the actors were arrested and thrown into jail. Thomas Nash got wind that an arrest warrant was out for him. He hightailed it out of town. He went into hiding in his hometown of Lowestoft, at least somewhere in that area. And he wasn't ever seen again. And after a few days, they were able to get all the actors out except for Ben Jonson, because Jonson, of course, had played a major part in producing this little act of sedition. And just to indicate how serious the situation was, not only was the Swan Playhouse immediately closed, all the playhouses of the city were closed, and they remained closed for 3 months. So that, imagine all the movie theaters in your town being closed because the Queen was, insulted in some movie in one of in one of the theaters. Anyway, with Nash out of town, that thorn in the Countess's side was once and for all blessedly removed. The actors were freed after several days. Jonson stayed in jail for several months, but eventually they were able to free him. The act he had committed would have been sufficient to hang him, so there must have been some serious work done in his behalf. But anyway, after he was freed, he had a lifetime of work. First of all, he became one of the chief playwrights in the Shakespeare company. He came to the Countess's defense in a 1601 publication called The Phoenix and the Turtle that we're going to have a look at a couple of episodes down the road. He, when King James came to the throne in 1603, the Countess's brother, Robert Sidney, became the Lord Chamberlain to Queen Anne. And so Jonson won pretty much all the commissions to produce masks for the Queen's court. And so these were a very lucrative source of income for him. And then when William Herbert got serious about his political career in 1613, Ben Jonson became his chief litterateur. And then once Herbert was Lord Chamberlain, Ben Jonson received £20 a year just to buy books. It was a nice gesture. So by taking the hit for the Countess in 1597, Jonson found a lifetime of work, rewards, and honours. Jonson is not in Shakespeare's folio as some independent outside operator, as some of our schoolmasters seem to think. He is there definitely as a servant of the house of Pembroke. Well, next time we're going to consider the work that Jonson and the actors and the other editors did preparing the first folio, and then consider the terrible fate that befell all the work they did. Hope to see you then. Bye.